Hello, everybody. My name is Go Payne, and I go with Payne. I'm a senior principal research scientist from University of Alabama in Huntsville, and I'm very excited about hosting and chairing this session together with Douglas, Charlie, and Sarah. And the title of the session is the Fostering Standardization of Data Governance Practice Across Earth Science Agencies. So why are we here? A lot of organizations, especially federal agencies, in response to the laws and mandates, are starting establishing data governance structures. And for example, the chief data officers and either data governance committee or data governance board, and they are starting activities. And that Susan and I, we were in one of the data governance sessions in NASA Earth Science Data System Working Group annual meeting in March. And it was very exciting and very productive 2 sessions. And we were looking at how, can you hear me?
And looking at the chin.
Oh, my chin is better. I think my eyes are better. So we're looking at the items in terms of what to govern, so what not to govern, what functions, what aspect of the data governance. And we were thinking about other agencies probably going through the same process. And one thing we were wondering what ESIP can do to help facilitating, especially, what are the gaps ESIP can fill in, and what are the overlapping part ESIP can help facilitating the whole process or practice that there's no redundancy across agencies. So Susan said, Payne, why don't you propose a session for summer ESIP? So we reach out to the core agencies, which are NASA, NOAA, and USGS. We get very positive response. So here we are. We have the session. The rest is history. And I hope you enjoy. We have a great lineup of the presentation to provide agency perspectives on data governance and activity they're doing and the challenging they might be facing. And we're going to move on to the discussions. We have a number of the questions Douglas putting together. So to set the stage for the session, and I'm going to start with the definitions. So the definition for the terms we're going to throw around in this session varies from different perspectives. And generally speaking, for data governance refers to overall framework, policies, standards, and process that guide how the data is handled with organization. So the key thing is about the regulate and the guide. And we do a lot of data management. That's like day-to-day activities, and data stewardship is oversight. Say, are you doing the right thing on the right way? And data stewardship a lot of time it's a function area under data governance. And then their strategies versus practice. So the practice are actually the method you taking, action you're taking to achieve the goals. And the strategies are the overarching plans and approaches that guide those practices. So on the right-hand side, I have taken the one from the DMI Data Management Book of Knowledge, and they have 11 areas for data management framework, and the data governance ties everything together. And this is based on the outcome from the ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT various different questions in terms, what governance framework, what are the core elements. And these 2 are the ones I felt like, I consolidated their solutions, and I think this 8 are most relevant to us. It has a data governance structure, data policy and standards, and a data lifecycle management, data stewardship, data management, metadata quality, data quality management, and as well as tool and now technologies and data security and privacy. So for this session, we're going to explore the shared objectives and what are the commonality and the disparity in each agencies. And we're going to discuss how ESIP can help to facilitate, especially standardization of data governance across agencies. We start with the core founding agency of ESIP, but we would like to extend it to other organizations as well. So here is agenda. I'm going to have this, I already have this brief introduction, and then we're going to have Douglas run the pre-session survey, and we have invited presentation. After that, we'll have the Q&A and the discussion from the panel discussion kind of goes to the general discussion. And each talk, we're trying to limit it to about 10 minutes. So I could give you maybe 2 minutes warning, just in case. Okay. Then we'll have a post-session survey. Then I'll come back up here and have closing remark.
Thanks, Ben. Right now, we just want to see who are in this room and then why, who are interested in this session. What does data governance mean for you? And so if you can just scan the QR code or just go to slido.com, use the hashtag data governance that will take you to the Slido poll. Or if you are in the collaborative note document, there's a direct link for each poll question, so you can go in there as well. There are multiple ways of participation. We're going to have a few, maybe a minute also to understand who we have in this room. You can choose multiple roles. You might be a mix between researchers and data stewards. That happens all the time. And you can be technologist and founder at the same time. Maybe in your previous role, you have different functions. Oh, I'm really interested in who those others are. Data stewards has a lot of the presence in this session. That's great. We have managers as well. Just out of curiosity, if you choose others, can you just shout out what's your role as others when you're there?
Data officer.
Data officer, great. Yes. Data officer and data architect, great. Data officer, great. We have a lot of data officer here. Awesome. Yes? Visionary. All right, I know who to talk to after this session. Any others? Connector, great. Thanks, Susan. Okay, I think we're gonna, let's see how many people responded. We got 56, awesome. Okay, let's move on to our next pre-session survey. What does data governance mean to you or your organization in terms of requirements, objectives? If you're just individual researcher, you can say what data governance mean to you as individual researcher or data source. And we're gonna collect all those responses as well and put them as a way for us to analyze the results after the session as well. So we're gonna give a little bit longer time this time because we need to type, so. 22 people active typing, that's great. Framework of open science. Ooh, it's moving fast. How we make decisions about data management, analysis, and release. Consistency and interoperability. Provide guidance on what we need to work on. Perceived as unfunded mandates. Ooh. Policy plans in place to achieve long-term preservation of the data you stored. And ideal to constantly strive for. That sounds like someone who called themselves visionary, am I right? And traceable process for decisions and accountability. We still have people typing. Consistent implementation of fair and care principles for our data. Framework how to handle the data, ensure that the data, metadata, are fair to all users. Clear and consistent standards, policy standards, standards showed multiple times. I think like Slido also kind of like trying to pull up some of the hot words like from the responses. Metadata fair, consistent, consistency, standards, metadata, policy, interoperability. Okay, I think. Yeah, I think this will be left open, so we're just gonna go, well, we can just go on to next slide, which, yeah.
Those are great, so keep it coming. And we'll move on to the next agenda, item in the agenda, which are invited presentations. The first one is by Jessica Morgan from NOAA, and she's the deputy of NOAA Data Governance Committee and NASTA's Assistant Chief Data Officer. And her title talk is the NOAA Data Governance Strategy to Outcomes. Thank you.
So do I hold this or?
You can use this one.
So use that forward. Okay, there's a halo behind me. There we go.
Yep.
Okay, and can you give me a 2-minute warning? Yes, wonderful. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Okay, so I'm going to start by saying I love ESIP, and this is actually my first in-person ESIP meeting, but I could tell over the past however many years with the fully virtual January meetings and the hybrid summer that like the vibe, these are my people. And just this first morning, like it's so cool to be able to interact with all of you. And thank you for being here and thank you for joining us online. I love too the commitment to hybridness. And that's awesome to get as many of our tiny little weird fringe data community to interact with each other and find each other and talk about technical details as well as big fundamental questions like what is data governance? Who are we? What is blue? Things like that. So this is exciting for me. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about my agency and specific things that we're doing, but I wanted to start because we're going to hear from my cousins and some other agencies about, you know, all of our agencies, we do all this stuff, right? And we'll hear some more details. And, you know, the details are all specific, but generally from the federal science agencies, what we do is we do a lot of things and we make a lot of data for a lot of reasons. And a lot of this mission data is foundational to everything, right? So there's nuance, there's, you know, it's all apples and mangoes. And in my career, so this is my 20th year as a NOAA professional, wow, 20 years. And I've worked in 3 of the 6 blobs up there. And they're all different, and they all have different histories and different workforce trajectories and different missions, like submissions within, right? Because NOAA is a pretty big agency, and it is foundationally like apples and mangoes. So, okay, within this and with the history, so parts of NOAA are like 200 years old, right? Going all back, way back to like the Coast Survey and things like that. And parts are relatively new, right? So the satellite service didn't exist until we could fly satellites, right? So in that sense, we are relatively new. But the oceans have been, you know, observed, and coastal communities have been observed for hundreds of years, and we have all this data, and we have been, you know, trying to be of service to the human communities for a long time, okay? So wait, where's my, there we go. Okay, so we wanted to talk specifically in this context of federal science agency, data governance, okay? So, we were given, the panelists, we were given the challenge to put together one of these circle diagrams and talk about what does this mean for your agency. So I'm going to specifically talk about my role as a data governance professional within a science agency. Okay? So we start with a mandate, right? Some of these are very strict mandates. Some of them are kind of like, is it really a mandate? And then we all have strategies, right? We have a strategy, our parent organization has a strategy, our children organizations, we all have strategies, okay? But strategies don't really do anything until you have policy in the federal agency context, right? So in our agency, we need something like an administrative order to set policy, to set requirements, to make all the different parts of the agency actually do the thing. But it's all these different pieces. So then it turns out we need guidance for the specific thing that you need to do. And just the best example is one of our line offices is marine ships and aircraft, right? So that's their thing. Obviously, the guidance on how to do something is different if you're on a ship versus an aircraft. Multiply that a lot across our agency. So we need specific guidance so that the practitioners who are actually doing the thing know what to do in the context of their work, okay? So that's half of this puzzle, mandate to actionable guidance. Once you have actionable guidance, you can start to look deep within, just really do some self-examination and say, okay, where are our gaps? We have been able to do many things for a long, long time. We have awesome capabilities across the board. We also have enormous, like, mind-destroying gaps of just like, that's impossible. We've never done it before. How would we even start? Okay? But we also have really smart, capable people, and we have partners, and we have cousins, right, within the agency and across our agency in other sectors who have ideas about solutions, right? So we've got gaps, we know what we need to do, we identify the gaps, we try to figure out the solutions, and then we get to something that is kind of new at my organization, which is an enterprise implementation of those solutions, okay? So we're a vast agency, we all have our, unique little systems that were designed for a specific thing with a specific pot of money 13 years ago, right? We kind of lack the ability historically to really invest and like agree and then invest and then commit to enterprise solutions, right? But that's where we hope to be, because from the data governance perspective, what I'm supposed to be doing is reporting on compliance. So how do we get to compliance when we don't have all the things in place to do all the things? I don't know. But calm down. Everything's fine. It's going to be fine. Okay. So just to give you an example of what this means within my agency. So we have a strategy, we have priority actions. This is just an example of what we did over the past couple of years. On a personal note, one of those things was establish the chief data officer and the assistant chief data officers for my agency. One of those is me. Yay! Okay, so check that box. We did that. But now we got to do everything else, right? And we're trying to be very broad. We're trying to understand, like, look at previous strategies and the scope and how sometimes they're too narrow, sometimes they're too broad. Try to pick and choose what to focus on with what we have, the talent that we have. That's awesome. Okay, so we have goals, we're doing stuff. We now have metrics, which is cool, right? So that took a long time to put in place, but we have come together and really looked inwards and said, okay, we have metrics. Now, solutions and outcomes, okay? But is it really now? As it turns out, outcomes, so cool stuff that happens if you do our jobs right. Outcomes are happening all the time, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of the cool outcomes, okay? And very briefly, because nobody needs to talk about AI anymore, blah, blah, blah. She's so cool. She's the coolest kid in the room. AI. AI only works if you have done your job with data, right? A more artisanally crafted cool thing is omics, right? So genomics was the cool thing like 20, 30 years ago. It is so much more than that now, right? It's metabolomics and it's proteomics and it's environmental eDNA versus what, it's all these things, okay? And as that, let's call it a niche field, has grown leaps and bounds in terms of maturity, in terms of the science, the technology, all those things, they need data infrastructure. No worries. To make it all happen, right? And there's kind of the assumption that the data infrastructure is there so that awesome things with omics can happen. Okay, are we ready for that? And then just taking it down to like, okay, just observing the ocean. We have been observing the ocean for hundreds of years, right? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. If we go back far enough, okay? So, you know, automating the observation of the ocean is not a huge leap conceptually, but data-wise, okay, we are going to, even with a small fleet of uncrewed systems, we are going to get an amount of data that will boggle every, like, it's just, and then what are we going to do with it? Oh, well, the AI community, all these communities are waiting to chomp on all that data. How are we going to get there? Okay. So, and then, oops. Okay. And then my pet project. So a lot of you have heard about the White House's public access policy, and it broadly says agencies shall do a whole bunch of things. So this is the policy that I happen to be working on, and it says do all of these things, okay? And let me tell you that every single object on this intentionally overwhelming diagram is harder than it looks, okay? We're doing some of it. We've been doing some of it for decades. We have some ideas about how to do things. We are looking to our cousins to figure out, but it's a lot. Oh my goodness, how are we gonna do this? Okay, so let me take a minute and step back and say, what I'm trying to fight, both in my work life and in my brain life. So as it turns out, I am autistic and I have ADHD. I didn't know that. I found that out like 5 years ago. And I'm like mid-career, right? Okay, so things that are boring and things that are shiny is like where I exist, okay? Hyper-focus is a superpower, even if it's on something boring, but shiny is also a superpower, right? Okay, so at the intersection of my brain and my work is data governance. Okay? Data governance is so boring. It's so boring. And there are shiny, awesome outcomes that other people want to make happen. And I want to be of service. I want to use my whatever superpowers I have to make AI happen, make omics, uncrewed systems. I want to bring indigenous knowledge from where it is to where it's going to be. I want to do all of these things while working on, I keep on hitting the wrong thing, boring things. Okay, so the reality is, and that I hope ESIP and this community, all of us here, what we can really think about, and this is where the autism part comes in, okay? I am not good about telling a story. I have to rehearse, I have to have examples, I have to think what my target is. The narrative that we say, how we present the boringness of infrastructure to the necessity of it, this is a message that I'm hoping our community can really come up with some great stories. Okay? Data governance is boring, but it's necessary infrastructure, okay? We gotta do it. And if we do it together, we get a mature data governance with awesome outcomes, not just the outcomes we can think about today, but for the next 10 years and the next 20 years, I'll be retired, hopefully. I mean, yay. But I am literally mid-career, right? But at the end of my career, I don't even know what the outcomes are going to be, but I want that infrastructure to have been in place for 20 years. Okay? So my question is, how do we make infrastructure, the most boring thing in the world, shiny? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for the excellent presentation. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation. So if you do have a question, still keep it and write it down. So the next presenter is Vivi from USGS. and she is the senior data advisor and also the lead of the scientific data guidance committee and reports directly to USGS Chief Data Officer, Branch Chief. Vivi is online, and Vivi, I will be forwarding slides for you. Would that be okay?
Sure, that's great. Thank you.
And her talk title is Data Governance Through Policy and Strategy, the USGS Approach. Take away.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Thanks, Peng. Appreciate it. Sorry to not be in person at ESIP this year, but glad to be able to present online. So as Peng said, I'm just going to talk quickly about USGS data governance through policy and strategic approaches. USGS does not have regulatory authority or management responsibility, but instead we're the nation's earth, water, biology, and civilian mapping agency in the Department of the Interior. So we bring foundational data and expertise to deliver real-time situational awareness, long-term assessments, and things like that that inform decisions for regulators and managers and policymakers and the public about an array of environmental resource and public safety issues. And so integrating all of that natural science activity and spanning scientific boundaries requires a lot of investment in data integration, high performance computing, artificial intelligence, modeling, analytics, laboratory facilities, visualizations, and so forth. So that's kind of what the overview of what we do. The next slide. So this is a quick look at USGS today, sort of by the numbers. Our director, Dave Applegate, put this slide together a few months ago to illustrate to audiences that were less familiar with USGS a few statistics and just kind of give a sense of the USGS. Usually people know or understand sort of one part of USGS. So there's a few interesting notes here that I looked at. There's over 165,000 publications have come out from the USGS since our inception in 1879. There's over 54,000 topographic maps. There's 3,800 earthquake sensors out around, over 11,000 stream gauges and so forth. So there's a lot of scientific data and information being collected, analyzed, and released to the public as open science in the USGS. Next slide. As I described just a little bit earlier, the scientific research at USGS involves a multidisciplinary approach with a variety of data collection and management techniques, needs, formats, sizes, integration, and that type of thing. And so we're a really distributed organization, as many federal agencies are. We have science centers in every state. And so it makes consistency in data management and governance sort of a challenge. But we're using a number of techniques, including policy and website guidance and training and community conversation, frankly, to help build consistent practices in our data-centric culture. Next slide. So this is a kind of an overview, a circle diagram of USGS data governance, which really consists of these foundational things like policies and our public access plan, our data strategy, and how we're implementing that. And then also really the people. People are a huge component of our data governance practices, as well as our enterprise tools and some assessments that we do around our metrics and milestones to make sure we're staying on track. Next slide. So one fundamental component of USGS data governance is our science data lifecycle model. This was developed around 2012 through our Community for Data Integration. And it's been used as a foundation for policies and tools and best practices that USGS follow for data management. Next slide. Foundational to all of this is our USGS fundamental science practices. This is what we call our policies. And so these were established in 2006. They're sort of a huge set of sort of operational principles and consistent practices that we use across the Bureau to ensure that we are doing our federal science consistently. These policies are governed by an advisory council, which we call the FSP Advisory Council, or FSPAC, and they provide guidance and direction and updates to these policies over time. Next slide. In 2016, we released 4 data management and release policies that really require scientists to release the data that support their publication. These are now being updated according to the new updates of the public access plan, which I'll talk about in a second. But these are all designed around the science data lifecycle model that I showed. They ask scientists to create a data management plan, create metadata, acquire a digital object identifier, engage in a review and approval process before releasing data into an approved repository, and depositing their metadata in our science data catalog, which is a searchable platform of all of our metadata across the Bureau. And then on the right side there, you can see a USGS data management website, and that provides scientists with best practices to meet the content of the policies. So the policies sort of tell us what we need to do, and this website helps with options on how to do them. Next slide. So the USGS Public Access Plan, as many of you know, in August of 2022, OSTP released a new updated memo around public access plans. And so all of the bureaus and agencies were required to update their current plans. And so we've done that. It's been approved by OSTP, and it's part of our data governance model. Some of the key things are that pubs will be made available freely and publicly accessible without default by any embargo or delay. And also our data has requirements have expanded. So it's not just the data based on your publication that needs to be released, but relevant science information or data that's been collected along with a project that might not be included in a publication. So we've gone ahead and updated that within our public access plan. Next slide. And this public access plan is considered USGS policy. It accompanies the 4 data policies that we have that reflect the public access plan. And then right there on the right, you can kind of see the different directives, a few of them that were incorporated into our policies and our public access plan as they came out of the higher level federal government. Next slide. So USGS just published a data strategy last year. This is our guiding document. It has 5 major goals. It has about 22 accompanying objectives. It was endorsed by our director in April of 2023. And it was really developed to emphasize sort of our contribution to open science through consistent management of valuable data assets. It talks about driving innovation to ensure data are integratable and analysis ready, increasing our data skills in the workforce, broadening our capacity to respond to needs of stakeholders, and measuring our progress in terms of fair data products. And so it's interesting because it encompasses both our business data as well as our scientific data, as there's a super close relationship between those two things. Next slide. This is the data strategy vision. It just talks about cultivating a data-centric culture to produce unbiased, accessible, high quality, and interoperable data, and having those managed as a strategic asset, and offering those at different scales and timeframes that are relevant to our society's needs. The next slide. So within the data strategy, I was talking about those 5 goals. This is a slide that kind of shows the expected outcomes from each of those goals. I won't go over these in detail, but really the goals sort of talk about maximizing the utility of our data based on our stakeholder needs, that we promote data innovation and continue to sort of drive forward and stay relevant, that we coordinate our common data practices by aligning all of our tools and processes across the Bureau as best we can, that we continue to modernize our USGS data enterprise architecture so it can keep up with the times, we can stay relevant and on the cutting edge, and enhance our data-centric culture so we can continue to strategically support the Bureau in training and through strategic hires and data science and workforce development, that type of thing. Next slide.
2 minutes warning.
Thanks. In terms of implementing the data strategy, it's huge, it's broad, as was sort of mentioned before in the last talk. So we're trying to find ways to figure out how to track that progress. So we did establish an implementation team to look at the best ways to sort of track existing efforts that are going on in the Bureau that relate to the data strategy, then perform a gap analysis and see what extra things need to be initiated. And we'll track those milestones wherever possible. This slide shows a request for proposal process that we annually support through the Community for Data Integration, and just how the proposals, excuse me, that came in this year support the data strategy and sort of map to it. So we're going to use this as sort of a model throughout other activities in USGS to be able to map them to the data strategy. Next slide. I think people are critical for ensuring data governance. And so this slide just kind of lists different groups in the USGS that work together to ensure that our data are governed appropriately. There are different contributions at different points in the workflow that help ensure our scientific integrity as we sort of review and approve and release and preserve our data. So that's just a general overview of different groups. Next slide. We also have a number of enterprise tools for science data management. These applications really help USGS in terms of data governance and how we're able to perform that. The data is managed across the Bureau following those sets of policies and strategic approaches, and these tools help streamline those approaches. Next slide. As you can see here, this is just one repository in the USGS called ScienceBase. It's one of the trusted digital repositories. This chart just shows kind of the increase since 2015 in releasing data to the public and how we're doing that. And a large part of our data governance sort of takes place at that repository level, where there's a team responsible to ensure consistency in the management and release of that data. Next slide. And then just to ensure that we're critically assessing our progress in data governance, we conduct assessments and surveys to advance our data practices. So you can see here, kind of on the right, there is a graphic of our state of the data research project. We led this assessment, seeing how fair our data products were in the USGS. And so we built a methodology to do that, and we established a baseline, and then we'll re-review that in a number of years. And then we've also looked at FAIR in terms of a roadmap for USGS and published some recommendations on that for our own Bureau. And we just recently released a survey on data management and release and sort of how that's working for people, so we can continue to iterate and improve the process. Next slide. So just a quick summary. Our approach to data governance in USGS includes policy and strategic planning, and just creating consistency across the distributed ecosystem through our people, our enterprise tools, and our assessments. And we really strive to ensure data governance is thoughtfully implemented, such that data are accessible and preserved well and documented well, and that they're a benefit to science and to the public. Last slide. Anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate being able to present to ESIP. Thanks so much, Peng, and everyone.
Thank you so much, Vivi, for the excellent presentation and joining us online. Again, we will have time for question after presentation. And our next talk is Sarah, and she's coming out to us from NASA, and she is the Science Data Operation Lead, and the title of her talk is Data Governance at ESDS. Do you want me to give you 8 minutes warning?
Yep. Okay, hi. So Jessica Morgan and Viv Hutchinson discussed data governance at an agency level, and the ESDSWG session that Peng referenced earlier discussed it at the Earth Science Division level. That's beyond the scope of what I can talk about, so I'm going to talk about data governance at ESDIS, the Earth Science Data Information Systems project at NASA that is responsible for the archive, ingest, archive, and stewardship of NASA's Earth science data. And I'm going to talk about the data governance that we use to support our user needs and support open science and all the great things that we want to do. So, so there's just a quick outline, but for time's sake, I'm going to skip that. So I went to, at the ESDS WG session, we discussed setting up a data governance board. I was like, well, what do we really do that's data governance? So I went to Google and Googled data governance, which covers so many things as we've seen in the last couple of presentations, but really it's a principled approach to managing data during its life cycle from the time it's acquired until it's disposed of. So ensuring it's secure, accurate, available, and usable, that it's fair, setting internal standards, and monitoring compliance with external standards. And I just wanted to show this. I am not sure how many people are familiar with ESDIS. I know a lot of people in this room are because I recognize you, but some people I don't. So ESDIS is a project that includes the 12 different DACs, or data active archive centers, yes, across the country. And while each of them is really the specialist in working with their user community, the people who work in that discipline, who use that data, we all work together also to ensure that interdisciplinary users and multidisciplinary users and all our DACs meet these high data standards, and that users can expect the same high quality, regardless of which DAC they use. So for us, data governance at ESDIS is really about managing data across the DACs. So right now we have numerous activities that fit under the umbrella of data governance. I brainstormed for a little while to think of them, and then when I came back, it was like, oh, and. So I have my and more, so I'm just gonna go through a couple of these. So we have the preservation content specification group that looks at what is archived with the data long-term. This includes information about maybe the science team, a description of the instrument, ATBDs, raw data, the software used to generate the data, metadata, all the information needed to understand the data and regenerate it if necessary, and all the data that a scientist might need to understand, the history of that data. We are working on a data archive policy, especially now that we're in the cloud. Archiving data is expensive. Once it's in there, we are paying for it for eternity, right? The cloud costs just keep going up. So we have to decide, what data do we archive for eternity? Can some be deleted? Can some be sent into deep storage? Is there data that we shouldn't archive now that we can't just fill in the little spaces on the hard drive, right? Is there data that we should have but only available on demand? So the data archive policy answers that kinds of questions. We have as a standards coordination office, which maintains a list of approved standards for NASA's Earth data, and it coordinates standard activity, including reviews of standards, both internal and external, and setting standards, conventions, and best practices relevant to NASA data. We have a DOI working group, which all things related to DOIs, including things like what gets the DOI, and I think the eternal collections of collections DOI debate, whether things that are related should have a DOI that allows them to be found together. The Data Product Development Guide, it provides best practices to those who develop Earth science data products. Version 2 was just published after many years of revisions, with one thing it includes is all new material for airborne, but it is a guide that constantly needs to be updated. So the OFAIR working group, which Peng leads, is one of our ESDS working groups. It looks at how to increase fairness of data, and they also recently published a paper, which I forgot to write the name of, but Peng knows all about it, so talk to her. Yes. There's a data interoperability working group that's been going for a long, long time. I want to say possibly more than 10 years, working on how to improve data interoperability, which is a huge question, especially when your data comes from many different sources. And then the metadata stewardship is a pretty new group that's looking at what are our basic metadata needs to meet needs across our DACs and provide a consistent user experience as we move to more unified enterprise efforts. And then we have a lot more, I was thinking the Airborne and Field Data Working Group, which I am part of, does a lot for airborne and field data and looking at what we can do to standardize across those efforts when, again, airborne and field data come from lots of different sources. There's looking at a lot of different things, but what can we do to standardize user experience? So lots more. But the problem with this is these are all independent efforts, and any coordination might be because someone like me is involved in more than one of these groups. I mean, a lot of people are involved in more than one of these groups. Or I happen to be talking to someone about something I'm doing, and they're like, oh, I'm doing that too. So we don't always know everybody that's working on the same issues. And we also, like the DPDG, we decided to write that as a best practice. But that means, yes, please do this, but not do this or else, right? There's no teeth in our recommendations. So one thing, I guess, I lost my notes here, and I don't trust myself to not remember things. There we go. So what can we do better besides identifying gaps? I mean, first that includes really getting a handle on all our data governance efforts, then identifying gaps, and then establishing a structure that will enforce policies and look at and coordinate efforts across the project, look at processes and standards across the project, and then finally align them better with our partner agencies so that what we know what we're doing aligns with NASA, aligns with USGS. We proposed an ESDS data governance board, but I am proposing an ESDS data governance board that will coordinate the implementation of ESDS's data strategy, advise and recommend actions to promote a coordinated and collaborative approach, and oversee NASA's Earth data information management. And its membership would include ESDS and representatives from the DACs. It would serve as an advisory body to establish data governance policies and priorities, develop strategies for the effective management and sharing of NASA's Earth science data, provide guidance on data management practices across the entire data lifecycle, enable collaboration across stakeholders, and consider alignment with partner agencies. And this I just actually took from the ESDS proposal we had at ESDS-WG, but I can only work on my level. So this is like everybody had their wheel. This is kind of my example of what would be included in that wheel: data stewardship, interoperability, data governance, metadata curation, open science, communication, and then any standards, guidelines, procedures, policies would be reviewed and recorded by ESCO. So Steve, there's some work for you. I'm about out of time. 1 minute. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to go into what each of these are because it's on the slide, but that's what I've got. I'm done. So thank you.
Just a reminder that we linked all the slides into the collaborative note document. So if you haven't gone in to sign in, you can, this is an opportunity to remind you, go in to sign in, then you can also find a link to all the slides because some of the words is hard to see on the presentation in the room.
Thank you, Sarah, for the great presentation. So again, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Next one is Deborah Smith, and she is the, what's her title now? You used to be ADMG, the green, yeah. So the title of her talk is Implementing Impact's Modern Data Governance Framework, and I'm so fortunate to be part of the team that developed the framework for the for US Greenhouse Gas Center.
Good morning, everyone. What's that? Yes, please. So I am the data operations lead, data information operations lead for the new US Greenhouse Gas Center. If you haven't heard of it, it was released in beta form last November 28th. And it is an evolving center. We're going to be having another push this fall that will introduce a new look and function. The project was quickly spun up per White House mandate, starting in about June last year, and we developed a portal based on science subject matter expert input over those resulting months from about June, really July 1st or so, up until October. And then we waited for our URL to release in November. So it's a miracle what we did. Quite honestly, I don't think a lot of us on the team got a lot of sleep. Certainly I didn't, trying to make it happen. But we're very proud of how far we got in that small period of time. And a lot of credit goes to this modern data governance framework that Peng and myself were part of a Tiger team that developed this framework in May of last year, and we were the first to implement it. So I'm going to introduce to you, I'm taking kind of a different tack than these other speakers, because mine is taking this framework then and implementing it for our project and giving you a little bit of feedback on how that goes when you're down at the project level trying to do data governance. So I think this group probably doesn't need it, but honestly, this is how I started. Data governance, oh, okay, that's a really scary idea. I have to do that and build a portal, and I don't really want to do that right now. That's about where I was last July. So I have two different definitions here. I'll put them both up. It depends your perspective. If you're kind of a scientist, your ongoing activity that accelerates the time to science by making it easier to create, find, understand, trust, use, share data, documentation, and code. I can grab my head around that, being a scientist. The next one is kind of more from the policy and management point of view of it's an ongoing activity that provides the principles, the policies, the processes, the framework. So as you can see, it's like how you look at it, but really they're saying the same thing. For me, there was a lot of challenges to scientific data governance. I was dealing with diverse and complex nature of scientific data, specifically all of the different kinds of greenhouse gas data and the different ways in which it's collected. A lack of understanding as to what data governance is and why I really needed to do it at that moment. Multiple standards bodies to have to listen to. Guidelines, recommendations, and best practices are not always available for any new policy. SPD 41 came out and it was great as a policy, but how do I do that, right? What do I do on the project level for that? Existing recommendations are distributed. They're not always written for the scientist or someone who's new to data management, so it doesn't make it easy. And its siloed nature of governance and standard decisions across organizations and emerging technologies, including AI, are affecting all of this. So the picture for me is like, that's what I had July last year. I had to climb a wall, right? And I didn't have much way of doing that. So I looked at the modern data governance framework that we had just developed and said, can I adapt that for the greenhouse gas data center? It's unified and adaptable science data governance framework that can be customized by a project. So the first thing I did was say, okay, how am I going to customize this? It aligns with government mandates and organizational policies, in this case, the organization being NASA, who developed it, right? We work with NASA, but I was now suddenly dealing with a multi-agency project. I have NASA, NOAA, NIST, and EPA to consider. And everything I do can't come from just the NASA point of view. So that was important. It maps policies to actual requirements, and as well as recommending data management procedures and tasks to fulfill those requirements. It's modern because it suggests ways to automate your data management tasks and monitoring. It's designed for cloud-based data management and ensures that governance processes meet policy requirements. And that was important. I needed a way to like make a data governance framework fast and get it as complete as possible. So this worked for me. The motivation is that you've got all these project needs, policies, processes, standards. You have to kind of untangle all of that. Up here at the, do I have a mouse? Yes, I do. You have to untangle all of that, make sense of it, align it with community standards and requirements coming at you, and then implement your rules and automated checks so that everything in the end is like this. It's all nice, it fits together, and you've got a smile on your face. So this is what it looks like. And I'm going to just briefly kind of wrap your head around it, which is what I had to do. And then I can dig into how we implemented it for the Greenhouse Gas Center. We have the core entities on the left. So you've got data, metadata, digital content, code, storage, and people. These are your core entities. And we need to look across the data lifecycle activities. So you plan, you generate, curate, share, use, reuse, preserve, monitor. And then you have your requirements, your procedures, and your recommendations. So this is a three-dimensional box that you have to dig into. And at each stage, you've got these recommendations and procedures that you can follow, and automation ideas for how to automate that step. So all the parts are mapped to each other. This is a big entity, the whole framework, and I'll introduce kind of what we did. We had challenges. One, we were the first ones trying to use it in real function, real implementation. It was one thing to design it and to have this idea. The second thing is, was it going to work? And we were the first ones trying to do that. And we were trying to do it fast. I didn't have much time. I had to deliver this by October, and we were starting from nothing. So how was I going to do this? The challenges were that we had these multiple organizations and agencies to think of. We found out there's few standards existing for GHG data, that every one of these different organizations were using different units, they were putting their data in different formats, the metadata styles were different, and so that complicated our implementation. Data and differing quality, readiness, and complexity and purpose was out there. We were bringing in 13 data sets in a short period of time, and we needed everything to blend and look cohesive and be communicating. And our mandate was curated and trusted, right? A curated and trusted center for greenhouse gases. So we needed to make sure that we exposed that to the user of the site. And we were meeting, oh my goodness, many different kinds of stakeholders. And it took us a lot of time to wrap our heads around this. We first tried to use it in GitHub, because it is in GitHub for using in that venue, but some of us are not so very good at GitHub yet. And ultimately, we took it into a Google Doc where we could do a lot more ease of editing for those of us who like that kind of collaborative work. This is an example of it applied to the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. What you see here is on the left is your box A 1.2.4, and it tells you what the issue is. Ensure data sets are assigned persistent identifiers. It gives you some recommendation, which we turned into red so that we had it right in front of us. And then we wrote our specifications for our project below that. Now, to turn it into our full document, all we have to do is remove the structure around that we worked within, and then we've got our document. So black's our content, and it's there, and it was a wonderful way of kind of pushing us through the whole process and getting us to think of everything. This is an example for some data. You have your planning and design, all your steps and requirements, then you have your implementation procedures, and then we could go through and step through everything and say, what are we gonna do for this project specifically? So what were our lessons learned? One, it was important to think carefully early on in the project which entities and sections we needed so that we just didn't bother with stuff that didn't apply to our project. Because not all sections are relevant to every project. Remember that. We found it easier to work across life cycle stages for one entity at a time. We took data and we went across all the stages, and then we took metadata and went across the stages. That worked better than trying to do all the planning at once, then all the next stage. So how we approached it worked. We rearranged the document to improve the workflow, and that fed back into the MDGF. So the template we have now is improved because of the way we approached our work. And we did take on the effort in steps. First, we did the sections, then we began the planning stage, worked at one core entity at a time, revisited sections as the framework developed, and now we treat it as a living document that needs to evolve with the project. What worked by doing this whole thing? What didn't? One, the MDGF provided structure and reminders for tasks that might otherwise have been overlooked. We're not all experts to the degree we need to be to implement a project one this fast with a group of people and make sure that we're doing everything right. So this gave us that structure. It had already had all our requirements in one place. It was fantastic. Having the linkages to the requirements and existing standards provided the guidance we needed to effectively continue our progress as we moved through all the stages. What didn't? Well, we realized that evolving standards and requirements will necessitate continual work on the framework itself, right? If it's out of date, we're gonna be out of date. So that's a big thing to think about. And working in GitHub, well, it's easier for some and not so easy for others. And so it made us for a complicated writing process for some of us, so we just went over to Google Docs, which one can do. Top takeaways here, and then I'm done. Using the MDGF helped us think in a holistic way in planning and implementation. It was less scary. I ended up with a complete document. The value of the MDGF was curated requirements and recommendations provided in a single location. So everything's all nice and tidy. And to remain effective, it's gonna have to have regular updates and recuration. That's the downside to it. That's gonna take work in itself. And now we're looking at AI LLM to gather content. Imagine if you could say, oh, I want to do this and this and this for my project, and the AI thing could just help you spit out your data governance framework, meeting all of the requirements that are out there. This is the GitHub MDGF if you're interested in checking it out. And that's the US Greenhouse Gas Center if you'd like to take a look. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the excellent presentation, Deborah. Next item is the Q&A session.
So I'm gonna run the mic because we have people online. So if you want to ask questions, it'd be great to speak to the mic. Yeah, Mark.
Hi, Mark Parsons. Deborah, this is for you wherever you went. I really liked how you had the two definitions, sort of from the user perspective and from the policy perspective. And you hinted a little bit at this, but maybe you could expand a bit. Did you find tensions in sort of meeting those two definitions, that they didn't necessarily always align?
Maybe if we can ask all the speakers in room to the podium, so it would be easier. So Jessica, do you mind also go there? So in case they pick, also Sarah, do you want to go there as well? Right.
No, because honestly, I was moving so fast. It was more important that we got our data governance framework done, and I used this, and I got it done. And at now that I'm breathing again, well, I'm not yet breathing. I'll breathe this fall when we get the non-beta version out. But I will be able to go back. This is a living document. We will spend more time. But we've really been moving so fast on this project that we didn't have the time.
Other question?
Hi, Valerie Dixon from NASA ESDIS. I generally do metadata search and discovery, and I have a question primarily, I think, for Jessica and Viv. From your other agency's perspective, when you talk about creating enterprise infrastructure and these enterprise solutions, the enterprise is great, but when you're trying to be a jack of all trades, you tend not to be a master of none. You also tend to move really slowly. I'm wondering if you guys have encountered these issues yet, how you may have overcome them or how you're dealing with them. I would love to have a deeper discussion with you all about that.
So is Viv online? Can we?
Yeah, Viv, I think Viv is still
Yeah,
online.
let's hear from her online. And
Yeah, Viv, are you still online with us?
I am here. Do you see
Great.
me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Well, okay, so just to answer the question, in terms of enterprise tools and metadata management and that kind of thing, it's been a long road. I mean, we've been working on this for well over a decade. I'd say actually a good 20 years, honestly. It started really small in our bureau and it just focused on biological data at the time. And we built sort of like a metadata clearinghouse. And from there, as our programs kind of shifted and changed over the years, we were able to expand that program into a science data management team of people. And so that clearinghouse that we had started, we leveraged to build our USGS science data catalog. And so it's kind of a multi-pronged thing. When we were able to put policy in place that said, we need to write metadata about all of our data that we're releasing. At the time, it was before the public access plan had even come out, the first memo even. And we were still able to write those policies and say, we need to create metadata. When you write a policy, it's really helpful to have a tool that helps people. So on that enterprise level, we were able to offer a metadata tool that aligns to the FGDC standard. And so people started creating that metadata using some of those tools. But it does take kind of a slow ramp up, if you will. And we've eventually been fortunate enough to be able to spend some of our appropriated dollars on supporting these enterprise tools and supporting the sort of help that is needed for scientists in terms of training and that kind of thing along the way. So hopefully that helped to start answering the question.
so I think part of your question was, enterprise takes forever. What are you going to do in the meantime? Okay. So at NOAA, where we have the privilege of being 15 years into a data governance story, right? So when the first public access memo came out in 2013, we did a lot of stuff. And so we have some systems that were built for very specific reasons and survived the last however many years, right? Some of them didn't. So where we are now, we have an opportunity to kind of look at those systems from all the different pieces of our family that have the potential to grow into an enterprise, and which systems nobody's used for years, or only a small community uses it for a specific one thing. Okay. I'm not going to name names because a lot of my NOAA family are here, but you know what I'm talking about. But the point is that we have the benefit of having been thinking about this for about 15 years, and we're at a kind of an inflection point situation where we can make the choice to enterprisedly adopt a handful of tools and focus our investment and our talent and our training and our onboarding and all of those things into a handful instead of, let's say, 83 tools.
I think we have time for 2 questions before we move on to our next steps.
Hello, my name is Bhaskar Ramachandran. I'm the LATSAC project scientist. So all three three or was it four presentations, I guess, they were really good. Here's my question. My concern is over enabling technologies. And I tend to view data governance as sort of subsuming the question of what enabling technologies we have. And I know you'd mentioned, Jessica, like omics, for instance, Now, do we have a common understanding of what the best ways for discovery or searches or data integration or interoperability? Basically, what I'm asking you is, do we have the same level of appreciation for enabling technologies as people have in NIH, for instance, or the biomedical sciences, for instance? Earth sciences are, we are about a decade behind the curve. And I've been sort of following some of these technologies, semantics, for instance, and ESIP for a long time. But I generally feel we are not on the same page as far as how the others who have made headway using these technologies have so far. So I'd love to hear what you think.
All right, so I'll take a stab at that. Okay, so I think there's, from a big data perspective, there is a desire for all the data to be in the same format with the same type of metadata, all exposed to the same type of API magic, so that big tools can just grind through everything, okay? But that's like far distant future, okay? Where we are now is we have communities of practice that are different levels of data maturity, right? And so the approach that we're trying to nurture is to empower those communities to set their standards. We're not going to force the omics community to use the satellite, standards, because they are different communities of practice. And in the future, it might all be one giant churn, but right now, the practitioners who are building this field and maturing it, they need access to the data now, okay? So there are new communities that have been doing stuff forever, but are like moving into a data footing. So I'll just call out socioeconomics, only because both my parents, social scientists, they forgive me, okay? So they've been doing this for years, but they're starting to move into this, okay? So it would be nice if we all had the same standard, but we cannot, and we have to make room for that, okay? But then when we have a community that wants to interact with each other, we need like a partner, like ESIP, to say, hey, let's nurture the omics families. Let's nurture the fisheries logbook community, or whatever weird fish thing. I'm teasing fish. But, right? And then build those communities to give them what they need, and hope and pray that we get to a point where everyone has access to everything later.
Let's see if there's any other speaker want to respond to that question. I think we have one last question in the room, or do we have any question in online? Okay, we can do two questions. Yes. Now maybe go to the Zoom question first, if you want to read it now.
I don't see it.
For our Zoom question, if you want, you can unmute yourself.
Cool, I have my hand up.
Yep,
I don't
go
know
ahead.
if somebody else. Okay, cool. Hi, this is Steve Formel. I'm with USGS, and I used to work with NOAA. And so this question, I think, is primarily directed at Jessica, or toward Jessica, but I think Viv and maybe other people would have thoughts about it too. So Jessica, you talked about the reality of shiny data types, versus sort of the tedium of data governance. And I think it's the rare person that can comfortably stand in both worlds. Back when we were working together more often, I remember that you endeavored to create a data management job series in the government, but I don't think that's been accomplished yet. So I'm curious, what else do you think can be done to budget for these personnel, and also smooth the path to bring in personnel who understand data governance and also have the technical expertise to stay up to speed with these cutting edge data types?
Stephen. Last time I talked to you, we talked for like 2 hours about all these things. Hi, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Okay, so a lot there. Two things, though, is one is data management workforce, or data workforce, not management, data workforce. What is that, and how do we build that? There's something else in there, but let me focus on that, okay? So, and give you a little insight, if you're not in a federal agency, into how the federal agency works. So we have, in the federal agency, we have like 10 types of jobs. 10. They're very specific. They are giant binders that explain every aspect of what those jobs are. And so there's like IT professional, right? There's oceanographer. There is not something in between. Me, right? I am not an IT professional. Most data managers, data specialists, data officers in an oceanographic content, we're not IT. We might have a science background, but we're somewhere in between. So this is, I'm sure, not a problem unique to NOAA. Correct? So how do we create a data management workforce if we don't even have a place for the data professionals that we need to come into our agency and get a job and see a trajectory of cross pay bands and pay steps and things like that? What if we could define this weird in between of data specialist, data manager, data steward? They're different, okay? Data officer, data architect. Data scientist is a distraction. Don't get distracted by the shiny data scientist, okay? A data scientist can come in and do magic, assuming everything else is in place, okay? So how do we do that? And this is an intractable federal situation. How do we create a new job series for who we are? But let's do it, right?
All right, I think last question in the room.
Can I add
just
one thing to that?
Viv, go ahead, sorry.
Just really quickly, USGS does have an enterprise-wide position description for data managers. And so we've like required our science centers to all hire that data manager. So there is like a consistency there. And then I just wanted to also mention that in the Department of Interior, we have been working on data literacy training programs and sort of where to find those and categorizing those properly so that people have easy access to different elements of the data lifecycle, sort of how to increase their knowledge there. And also through our community for data integration, we've put on a huge sort of series of trainings around data using the data carpentries methodology. And those are open to other agencies and people from non-USGS to participate in as well. So just wanted to mention a few of those things in terms of building the federal data workforce. Thanks.
Thanks, V.
Hi, Joseph Gum, NCAR Data Stewardship Coordinator. The quick question is, how do you measure your impact or outreach of your data governance? How are your policies getting out to your agencies, organizations, communities? Now, blatant advertising. I have a session on DMP tool on Friday that I'm trying to get people to show up to and get their DMP guidance into, because as both a specialist repository administrator, but also someone that helps people broadly across the NCAR community apply to NOAA or NASA or USGS or whoever, I only really know what to do for my own NSF repositories, and cutting through what the latest DAC guidance or, I mean, in the description, I went onto DMP tool, there's no specialized guidance for USGS in DMP tool, and I've been pounding that for near a decade to grad students and postdocs. And so how do we get all of this data governance out to everybody out there?
I thought it was a quick question.
It's like the core of who we are. Down at the project level, I don't know if I have an answer.
Go ahead, Deborah, if you want. Viv, do you have any answers when the speaker in the room trying to answer, figure out if you have taken answer or not?
That was a big question. It's all about kind of advertising the data governance. USGS has taken the approach of just making everything public. So you can find all of our policies online. You can find our data management website online. You can find our community for data integration and so forth. We do spend a lot of time communicating these things through things like our communities, places of that nature. We also have, the leaders blogs that go out in terms of, internal communication from our leaders that often address these types of things. And in terms of data management planning tools, we have that listed on our data management website. We have not gotten to the point of a streamlined data management plan across USGS. There's just so many different data types and different data experiences. It's been very difficult to do. But there is a paper out there about how we've been looking at the data management plan in general and scientists' reactions to it and how they're using it. So that's something I can pop in the chat as well. Thanks.
Yeah, and I can add that Peng did a lot of the background work for the MDGF of gathering the different requirements, but they're NASA only, right?
And they're coming down from the laws and the mandates, and
Yeah,
then the NASA has the guidance and policies.
Right, and so since NASA is the implementer of the US Greenhouse Gas Center, we stuck with NASA policies for the US GHG Center, but should we go look at the NOAA and the EPA and the NIST policies? Yes, although all of those agencies have pointed to us and said, oh, you've got a better one, don't worry about it, so. Haven't done that yet.
Our policies are mostly on the Earth Data website, which is in transition right now due to our web unification policy. So at some point, everything will be there again, easy to find, including our DAC websites, which have policies of individual DACs. I think also, as far as data management plans, each DAC really works with the data providers individually to make sure that they meet our requirements. It's a very, not a hand-holding, but interpersonal relationship between DAC and data provider. It's not just dump your data. There's a lot of work that goes in there to make sure that it meets our standards, so.
Thanks for our speakers for Q&A, and can we get another round of applause for all the speakers? So right now, we only have 10 minutes left. We were originally planning maybe a short breakout, but now we're not doing that anymore. So we're gonna do this, the Q&A was so good. So we're gonna do 2 Slidos before we wrap up the session. The first question, again, same drill, scan the QR codes or like go to the slido.com and enter in. So after the session today, just all the presentation and discussion we just had, so what are the priority areas of data governance for you, either for you as an individual or for the organization or office that you're working for, and think about the priorities that and all the things that we just talked about in the session today. There are first answers in connecting to real users. Data workforce. Interoperability and workforce education. Just trying to summarize the long answers there. Transparency, coordination, figuring out what areas of data governance need multi-agency collaboration, and finding the right mechanism to support that. Policy, drafting, and decision-making. Carrots and sticks. we'll give another half or a minute for this answer comment. Consistency for data users. How to align data practices while waiting for relevant data governance. Making sharing data, data sharing more possible in the space between open and closed data. Learning from other agencies, inclusion of external voices, collaboration and interoperability, particularly between agencies with similar data sets. Giving Jessica more funding to hire more data people on her team. Right, one more. Yeah. All right, so we will still keep that open. So if you haven't get a chance to put your answers in, you can still do that. And the final slide I'll put before we wrap up having a next step conversation is what do you think ESEP or other groups can help with those data governance objectives and priorities? That can be as simple as having a consistent data governance session every ESEP meeting, or can be more specific, like working on specific projects. So cluster idea, okay. Sharing lessons learned through venues like this. Continue discussion, promote cross-pollination, cross-communication, sharing what works and what doesn't. I think I really like the what doesn't part of that conversation as well. Community practice, defining what the priorities are, enterprise and open tools, or collaboration across all channels, facilitating collaboration across agencies. It seems like collaboration is a common theme. And maybe some of the resource sharing as well, using a mutual place. And so one person is still typing. So again, this is going to be open. After the session, we're going to send out follow-up email to everyone who can still put your input into the Slido networking, increase agency buying to ESIP. And great, I think there's some themes emerging, and we'll take this response back and come up with some next steps. And Pen, do you want to come up for wrapping things up?
Yes, as Douglas mentioned, we're going to leave it open so people can continue. And one thing we didn't get to do is the Jamboard, and there's a link and QR code there. So if you do have time or would like to provide a feedback, please put it there. That we can also take a look afterwards. So we have discussed it today, the perspective from the different 3 core agencies for ESIP, and we have seen a data governance framework in action, and we have get some sense who are interested in the data governance, and that we will take more look afterwards. And we have looked at the priority areas of data governance. That's the outcomes of Slido question 2 and 3. So the roadmap forward, one thing is to continue our discussion, as one we have mentioned that we are interested in, and we will, Sarah is leading a session at AGU. Please submit your abstract to it. We still have another week also to do so. To continue that conversation and continue that potential collaboration. And then the outcome of the Slido question 4, we will also look at it and see what's the best way forward. And the ESIP is the great place to collaborate, and that connects different agencies rather than working with priority of individual agencies. And we will look at other key points from the discussions and Q&A session, as well as the feedback if you are able to put it on the Jamboard. So thank you all for coming to the session, whether it's in person and online. And a hearty thank you to all the invited presenters. And we would like to thank EASY staff, especially Laura, the fellowship, for helping with this session, and the tech support. And I also like to thank the session organizers, as well as Susan, who put this in front of me, say, Payne, propose a session. And let's connect and collaborate if you're interested in this subject. Again, if you are able to or would like to continue to follow what we do and put your email in the Google Doc, or we can reach out to you when we need it. Either we like to engage you in the process, or we like ask you for your expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we are right on time.